Hello, everybody. Welcome back to video 17 in this series. I'm preparing some lectures for summer camp with high schoolers, and instead of watching the video, editing my lecture notes, and then deleting the videos, I decided to share the videos. So we've been doing a whole lot in this series. We're up to uh, just finished introducing scripting, so now we're ready to adjust the default player script that comes in Godot 4. Why'd that zoom in? There we go. It's probably hard to see on the video when it zooms in. So we just finished introducing scripting, and there's this default player script. We want to go through that, figure out which parts we want to change, and set up our player controls to something other than the default value. So that's the next step. And first thing I want to do is work out a plan because you don't need just a rough plan makes a big difference. You don't want to get stuck. You don't want to get lost going down rabbit holes making changes when you just approach things randomly. So I'm going to jot down some quick notes on the plan for what we want the character to do here. Okay, so over here to make a couple notes, and um, basically this is something I found to be a really good idea over the years. Just get some paper and stuff. Let's kind of draw out a reference to the coordinate axis. So in Godot, Z is going to be forward, X is left and right, and Y is the up axis. So we have our character, and right behind the character, there's a little camera. I'll try to draw it something like that. So those kind of come together as one piece. So we've made that connection and everything when we set up our character earlier. Now, how do we want this to move? And personally, I like the yaw pitch roll movement. Um, I think I have to grab my not pen to point at stuff on the screen. Hopefully my mouse is moving and showing on the screen now. I know sometimes with Journal, it, it has layers of mouses. So sometimes they disappear when I'm writing. I know that. But hopefully you can see the mouse cursor so I can point at stuff. But if yaw is rotation around the x-axis, so that's spinning as we spin, or sorry, not the x-axis, the y-axis, the vertical axis. We spin around the vertical axis. Pitch is spinning around the x-axis, spinning around the horizontal left-right axes, and roll is around the z-axis. So sort of the way a plane moves. Did I do that backwards? I think got the x and z backwards there. Yeah, I had to think about it. I got that backwards. But the one we want in particular is the yaw, so spinning around that, and that's the type of movement I like. The stuff we get from like a boat or a plane, and uh, so with that green, so the movement, what I'd like this character to do is be able to turn to the left and right, and its options of movement are just straight forward and straight back. Obviously, there's lots of different ways we can do this, and for now, the camera will come along with us. So if we character turns to the right, the camera is just going to stay attached there to the back and then look the direction they're going. And so we'll have forward and backwards, and then just be able to turn left and right and make those our options for movement. And we want to restrict it to this, and we want it to work with any controller. That's the other thing. I'll go ahead and jot that on here since it's a picture and talking about plans and stuff. Because the general setup, right, we've got the keys and our normal WASD movement if somebody's on a keyboard, but what if somebody's on like a nicer controller like this? One of these other controllers, we want it to work for that as well, or I guess there's different movements. Maybe somebody that normally plays flight simulators has the big joystick type controller with all the buttons up there, or all the different types of controllers we have, we don't want to explicitly say it's going to be this key. Or likewise, we don't want to explicitly say it's going to be this button on a controller. We want it to work for any inputs. And this little step here can be a very valuable step. Just get some paper or a digital version of paper and jot down some rough notes. And that way you don't get stuck going down a rabbit hole for what needs to happen. It can be refined later. You can go down the rabbit holes and get those fine details later. But first off, you just want to a rough get something roughly working and then clean it up. And just jotting down some notes will help you remember where to stop. And that way you don't get stuck down rabbit holes and movements because you could spend a lot of time on that. All right, so that's the plan. We'll set forward and backward. For us, that'll be the W and S keys will be forward and backwards. And then A and D and we'll turn left and right. And we'll do it in such a way that we can add in other controllers later. We'll just do the keyboard for now, but set it up for a generalized controller, not a specific one. So back over in Godot, the first step is going to be to look through this script they gave us and figure out what parts we need, what parts to delete, and maybe hopefully get some ideas on it. First thing I'm going to do is get rid of these comments because they're just kind of clutter here. The way I like to do that, if you're not used to using the home and end keys on your keyboard, that can be really useful for getting rid of lines or copying lines. You just click anywhere in the line, then hit end and hold shift and hit home. That'll highlight that whole line. And really useful for copying and pasting a whole line. And before the days of the mouse, we would use shift to drag and select stuff. Okay, now we're back to just the text that does stuff, so we can look through. So it looks like that speed is 5. I want to change that up a little. I know I'm going to want access to that from the inspector. I want that variable over here where I can change it on the fly and like while the game's running and stuff. And we saw that in the earlier script. So instead of a constant, I'm going to make that at export a variable. And I know it's a floating point number, so don't need to have the computer waste time figuring out that it's a floating point number. I can just type that directly now. Same thing for jumping. So I'll add the add export and make that a variable instead of a constant. And I know it's a floating point number, so we don't need to waste computer resources figuring out it's a floating point number. Gravity, we'll probably want that. This was a character body, or also known as a kinematic body. So we don't have all of the physics like we do in a rigid body. So we'll want controlling gravity. If not is on floor, well, that's kind of a nicely named method. If we're not on the floor, then we must be in the air. So that's where we're going to set our velocity. So it looks like we do have some physics. Velocity y is going to be the gravity times delta, and we talked about that last time. Delta is the length of time of the frame. And here in this script it gave us, you'll notice that instead of underscore process, which is the method that runs every frame, they gave us underscore physics underscore process. So clearly just a variety of the process function, one of the variances we have on it. I'm not getting into the details there, but this one is better for physics things, and the general process is better for graphics. In particular, it needs this method is one that might glitch out if we put it in a regular process. For our small example, we probably wouldn't have to worry about it, but I'll go ahead and just stick with what they have here. So we saw the jump. We're in physics process, or the frame rate when we have variances on the frame by frame function. So we take the speed of gravity we want, which is probably set to just natural gravity, and we've been measuring everything along the way, so that'll be good, times the length of time of the frame, which is just a fraction of a second, and then as the frames add up to a full second, then we'll have gravity pulling down at the proper speed. Here we go. If input is action pressed UI accept, and is on floor. So if we're standing on the ground and press whatever this button is, that's not a good name. We need a better name. So we'll probably want to rename that. Here we have something similar. We get a vector, and we talked about vectors earlier, but um, I'm going to split that up to components and work individual components instead of vectors. I think that looks like an easy spot to get confused if we just take all of our inputs as a vector and then pull the components out of the vector. I'm just going to split that up. Uh, Ultimately, the plan is to split it up in a selection structure. We'll see that in a moment. Then we do create this direction. And what is that direction going to be? Transform. Well, our player, well, we've talked about it before, one of our most important vectors or set of vectors. It's a vector filled with vectors. Uh, in game development is the transform data, the location, the rotation, and the scale, or labeled as position here. So we'll grab that data and then a basis. And when we were talking about vectors, we talked about a basis. Um, you're used to, like in math class, the X, Y, horizontal and vertical, just that nice 90-degree square grid where we set things up on a 2D plane. That's the basis, but that's not a restriction. We can choose anything. So what this is saying is take the transform uh, data and make that a vector. So kind of setting a new starting point. So every frame, we're going to take a new starting point that is the current transform data of our player, and then we're going to multiply it by this input vector, which can get a little. Um, if you're comfortable with vector math, that's not a problem. But I think it's easier, especially for an introduction, to split this up into individual values, and then we'll just build the vector we want here instead of trying to keep track of what of it that way. So slight changes there, but it'll be very similar. And then normalized means we give it a length of 1. We don't want if we calculate our vector and it's like an arrow pointing 30 units off in the uh, to the northwest or northeast, we might not want to go that far. So normalized gives it a length of 1, so then it points at the same angle, but only goes 1 unit in that direction. Give it as an idea of what it is, which then applies on the next one, because then we take that direction, the x component, and multiply it by our speed, and the z component and multiply that by our speed. So then we have that unit of 1 and just scale it up or down to match our speed value. Oh, and assign that to give our character that velocity. Or if we're not doing any of that, which means that if we don't have a new direction, so if nothing was pressed, then this is all going to be 0. So when we multiply our current basis times this vector, that it's all 0 because nobody pressed any buttons, then obviously this is 0. So if it's not 0, we'll do that. But if it is 0, we'll just keep the velocity we had. And then move and slide goes ahead and applies those things. It's like, okay, apply all of the changes. So that's what's going on in this script. We can clean it up a little bit, make it adjust a little, because right now it's just moving left and right, up and down with arrows, not the WASD key. So we need to change it to that. And personally, I like yaw, pitch, and roll movement. So I'm going to switch this to turn left and turn right, and then forward and backward. And jump would probably be a better name for this control, make it a lot easier to keep track of. But it looks like we're coming on 15 minutes, so we'll do that in the next video. Now that we have the plan on what to change, just these labels. We can probably change these a little, and instead of just getting that input direction, we'll just get the forward and backward, which would be our Z, and then our X will switch to 0, so we'll only move in the forward and backward direction here, and we'll rotate our character to figure out what the basis is. So we'll do that in the next video. I'll see you all there.